time travel, the key mechanic driving the narrative of Chrono Trigger. And as we've touched upon, during your first playthrough of the game, nothing is more exciting than finding a gate and wondering where you're off to next. Traveling through time can be done via the gates, the epoch, and a couple of odd anomalies. Let's focus on the gates first. There are 4 paired gates that link different eras: Lean Square and Truce Canyon, Guardia Forest and Banger Dome, Medina Village and Mystic Mountain, and the ruins of Tyranno Lair and the earthbound area of the Zeal era in 12,000 BC. Protodome is not linked to another time period and sends our heroes right to the end of time. We are told this gate sends our heroes to the end of time because the gates can only handle 3 people at a time, and overloading the gate caused them to be sent to the end of time. However, I'm throwing a wild idea out here. That gate is housed in the Protodome, clearly inspired by the Greek root proto for first or original. This is also the period where Balthazar has toiled away on time experiments, including the epoch. It is also noted that Balthazar vanishes during this time. While there is a theory about a being known as the entity having created the gates, is it possible that this was simply one of Balthazar's tests to see if structured time travel could be possible at all, establishing a link to the end of time before expanding the gates to reach other eras? It would explain why this gate is not paired, as it was perhaps the original gate meant to act as a prototype. It could also explain the relative instability of the gate compared to others. Despite being given the explanation that too many people entered the portal, maybe it's just the OG gate and is really janky. It is also worth noting that 3 of the gate pairs are connected to 1000 AD. It was clearly the intent of the entity, or whoever, to create connections to Chrono's time with the hope that at some point Chrono would stumble upon one of these gates. The only pair of gates that don't link to 1000 AD seem to be directly tied to Lavos in some way, going from the crater in 65 million BC to the Age of Antiquity, 12,000 BC, where the Mammon Machine summons Lavos. The epoch is obtained late in the game, but gives you the ability to leap between time periods without having to use a portal or make a switchover at the end of time. There is some discussion about why the epoch is limited to the same time periods as the gates, wondering why the machine wouldn't be able to explore any year it wanted. But I would say that this machine was given such a limit by either Balthazar or the entity because these were the time periods deemed to be of most importance. The events that occurred in these times would have a direct impact on the Lavos situation, and as such, needed to be the focus of any person who would end up using the epoch, i.e. Chrono and the gang. All of this time experimentation wasn't simply to mess around in any old year, it was to stop the crisis that inevitably would destroy the planet. That needed to be the mission of any time traveler who came along, so the gates and epoch would have to be tuned to only allow our heroes to affect the events that directly led to Lavos' rising. So, what kind of time travel are we dealing with here? Now, I'm no physicist, but this type of time travel seems to be through traversable wormholes. For a work of fiction, it's pretty standard fare. Go through mysterious portal, come out in another time. Though there are some quirks. It's not time travel that results in butterfly effect levels of catastrophic change, but our heroes can affect the past to change events in the future. For the most part, the game adheres to a simple cause and effect change as a result of manipulating events in the past. Show kindness to the mayor of Poor's wife in 600 AD, the mayor in 1000 AD will be a nice guy and give you the
Moonstone.
There isn't any kind of ripple effect, which is fine. It makes narrative sense to keep the time travel structured in this way. Now, what appears to be happening here, and is alluded to in dialogue in Cross, is when changes are made in a past timeline, the future that used to exist is discarded. The discarded timelines are sent to the darkness beyond time, a void of nothingness. This is a pretty handy mechanic to spirit away any paradoxical timelines. How else does the Chrono series deal with paradoxes? Let's try and suss that out. So one of the big paradoxes that gets thrown around a fair deal is the grandfather's paradox, wherein if you go back in time and kill your grandfather, will you cease to exist? This comes into play when Marle ends up in 600 AD and is assumed to be the missing Queen Leene. Calling off the search with the real Queen Leene still out there, and we assume her captors kill her, causes a chain reaction leading to Marle never being born. A theory has been built around the idea that the characters in Chrono Trigger have time traveler's immunity, which eliminates all instances where grandfather's paradox or causal loops might form. Chrono can affect the past, but is himself not affected by the change. While the world may change around him, he'll still retain the memories of his actions. You can challenge this theory and try to account for all of the what-if scenarios, but let's keep it simple. Time traveler's immunity works for the most part, and in a fantasy video game, let's not get bogged down by semantics. That said, there is one event where playing with time travel had disastrous effects. Let's take a quick look at the time crash. All we have to go on is what we learn in Chronopolis and from Balthazar, which isn't much, but tells us about an experiment being conducted at Chronopolis in the year 2400. The counter-time experiment would use the frozen flame to essentially control time. There is talk of having complete control over history, and if they go through with the plan, then what meaning is there to the history of mankind becomes a powerful question, as history will become fluid, malleable, and in the end, meaningless. With limitless time travel, anyone could shape their own history, and any sense of a larger history of humanity becomes lost completely. So, how did this time crash happen? It seems as though Lucca continued to conduct space-time research after the events of Chrono Trigger, developing a theory around the time egg and miniature black holes that would suck in space-time continuum to a single point of supergravity. Pulling it into the shape of a ring, this supergravity would create a gate through which people could travel through space and time. However, using the frozen flame created a connection between Lavos and Chronopolis, and Lavos pulled Chronopolis back through time to 12,000 BC. This was known as the time crash. Now, what is interesting is it seems like Chronopolis and the Sea of Eden actually remain in 2400 AD, but the space-time fabric around the sea has been cut and sewn onto the space-time of 12,000 BC. In response, the entity pulls Dinopolis to the same timeline in order to create balance, essentially as a countermeasure to Lavos' plan. So while the time travel remains mostly consistent in Chrono Trigger, here in Cross they throw a couple of odd wrinkles into the plot that really spices things up while also making it all more convoluted.
The balance of nature is a huge theme in Chrono Trigger and Chrono Cross, which symbolizes the fall of the Zeal Kingdom in Trigger to nature's representation as the dragons in Cross. Let's start with Chrono Trigger. The Kingdom of Zeal is, by far, the most impressive place Chrono and crew have come across. There is magic present. The kingdom is floating in the sky. It's a rich and flourishing land. And yet this wonderful spectacle masks a dark agenda. The queen of this lush kingdom and her followers, the Enlightened Ones, have dedicated their lives to Lavos, what they see as a god of sorts that can grant them immortality. They created the Mammon Machine, a biomechanical creation that serves as a kind of idol to the Queen and the Enlightened Ones. It harvests the power of Lavos, bringing dark energy to the Kingdom of Zeal. After releasing Melchior, who was imprisoned atop the Mountain of Woe, and being informed about the situation in Zeal, he says it seems the more energy the Mammon Machine absorbs, the further the Queen descends into madness, and that Lavos is overtaking her soul from within his slumber beneath the waves. Melchior also says the energy that the Mammon Machine emits is Lavos' power, and that same power feeds off nature and the planet's energy. When the gurus of reason, time, and life try to persuade the Queen to cease her use of the Mammon Machine, she rejects all of them, relying on the god of Lavos, not to reason, to time, or life, turning her back on the natural world in favor of power. When the creation of the Ocean Palace brings the Mammon Machine closest to Lavos, it is awakened and no one has the power to stop it. The Kingdom of Zeal perishes in the ocean, and with the connection to Lavos severed, the ability to use magic freely is lost. Unlike Chrono Trigger, which is all about this alien entity draining the planet of its life force, and the people of Zeal exploiting that alien entity, with our heroes working to save the planet from destruction, Chrono Cross puts our protagonist Surge in the middle of an all-out war between nature and humanity. The dragons who want a natural world, and the humans who want to rule the world with technology. We have the 6 dragons in Cross, who can all unite and create the Dragon God, a being that could tame, govern, and manipulate the physical world, aka nature. They view humanity as corrupt, bent on gaining power and to destroy other things, an aspect they relate to Lavos' influence. The elementals you fight in the Terra Tower, home to the Dragon God, speak of how humans have harmed their forests, their waters, that they should be removed from the world. There's a quote from Miguel, Lena's father, when you encounter him at Chronopolis, who was imprisoned by fate. When speaking about the adventurers that traveled back and forth in time, in order to prevent the apocalypse, he says, they realized they could not turn their back on the planet, even if its death would not be anywhere near their lifetime. This, of course, is referring to the protagonists of Chrono Trigger, and how they understood the balance of nature. The planet itself is a significant being in both Chrono Trigger and Chrono Cross, using powers to open gates and keep peace in the world. In Trigger, the planet is also known as the Entity, and is said to be the one responsible for opening the gates to aid in Chrono and crew witnessing events that would destroy Earth. There are also hints at this influence when Chronopolis sent itself back in time to save Schala from Lavos, where the planet drew the existence of Dinopolis from another timeline to combat the foreign presence of Chronopolis. More information on the enigmatic entity will be discussed in the theories and development section. The use of parallel worlds can result in a good story or a cheap way of explaining one phenomenon. Thankfully, the Chrono series uses it in a neat way to expand the player's thinking beyond the games. There are a few strange things added in. One, that the joke ending in Chrono Trigger, which ended up being a major influence in Chrono Cross. The concept of using parallel worlds came during the development of Chrono Cross, with the director, Masato Kato, wanting to keep the game on the same level as Trigger but not rehashing the same idea of time travel and changing the future by altering the past. This is what gave birth to the idea of Surge experiencing 2 different worlds, one where he is dead and one where he is alive. This brings forth a number of questions. Why did I die? What is different in this world? How did this happen? The use of parallel worlds builds the story of Cross, bringing items across from each world that may have not existed in the other. An example of this is when the crew needed a cure from a creature called a Hydra. In one world, they were extinct. In the other, there was only one left, and you made them extinct. But of course, there's the downside. The more cheesy usage of parallel world convenience. I am talking about Radical Dreamers, because it would never fit into Cross's structure. The excuse of Radical Dreamers taking place in an alternate dimension was adopted to stop any stretched theories to connect the two. They have a few glaring similarities, but Cross is technically not a remake of Dreamers, resulting in the latter being tossed aside. Seeing as it didn't officially make it outside of Japan, it didn't cause a huge impact. The funny idea that turned serious that I mentioned earlier takes the form of the joke dinosaur ending in Chrono Trigger. If you use the right telepad or the bucket in the end of time after fighting Magus, but before defeating Azala and the Black Tyranno, you will be rewarded with an ending that shows reptiles as the dominant species. In reality, you took Isla away to fight Lavos, meaning that Azala and her reptiles never died off, so long as they escaped the massive fall of Lavos from the sky. The game reenacts the opening of Chrono Trigger, where Chrono goes to the Millennial Fair, bumping into Marle and seeing Lucca, but everyone is now a reptile. As strange as it is, the developers of Cross actually take this parallel world into consideration, creating the homeworld of Dinopolis and the existence of the Dragonians. This is also where the 6 dragons of the game originate from, and the physical structure of Dinopolis that takes on the form of Terra Tower, where you eventually fight the Dragon God. This is all thanks to the time crash. Now for the major dimension brainfuckery, the Dead Sea. The existence of this enigmatic location has been hotly debated between fans for some time, asking questions of what it is, what purpose does it serve, and why it is the way it is. Many conclude that the Dead Sea is a window into Chrono Cross's homeworld future, where Lavos destroys the world. Now many of you are probably thinking, Chrono saved the future, so there shouldn't be Armageddon. It took me a while to finally understand it, but here's in the simplest explanation I could muster. Chrono and crew start at 1000 AD, where they are able to travel through time in another world. The original timeline to 1999 AD, where they fight Lavos and succeed in saving another world. However, in 1010 AD, through Kid and Balthazar's influence, they create a dimension rift after saving Surge's life, resulting in two worlds. Another world where Surge is dead, but Lavos is also defeated, and Homeworld where he's alive, but Lavos is still present. Home holds the same history as another until 1010 AD, when the split happened. Chrono and crew's influence was restricted to one dimension. They could time travel, but not dimension leap. So while they continued with destroying Lavos in another timeline, Home doesn't possess their future actions because they are locked in another's dimension. This results in Lavos emerging in Home and bringing about the world's destruction. The Dead Sea reflects the ruined timeline Chrono averted by killing Lavos and shows the destruction of the home world that Surge's existence inadvertently causes. In the middle of this chaos lies Chronopolis, the cause of the many parallel timeline influences. Chronopolis was run by the Guru of Reason, Balthazar, with the purpose of going back to 12,000 AD and separating Schala from Lavos, as she was bound to it, creating the Time Devourer. The planet, not wanting the same timeline to alter considerably, pulls in the influence of the Dinopolis timeline to counter Chronopolis unsuccessfully. Much later, in 1006 AD, Surge, his father Wazaki, and Miguel enter Chronopolis, and Surge causes the Prometheus circuit to activate and lock Fate, the supercomputer's power. This spurs the need to destroy Surge to release the restrictions, which eventually leads to Kid preventing Surge's death and causing the parallel dimension split. It's some heavy, confusing shit, but there are reasons behind most of them. Many theories have been pushed and introduced, with some having stronger points than others. I cannot even begin to address them all, so if you would like to read up on them, please follow the article link provided in the description that is shown here. Worlds in most RPGs are pretty simple, either taking place across the entire world the game is based in, where you get a sick flying aircraft that you can take to every location you wanted to go to but couldn't reach. When you throw time travel into the mix, it's fascinating how the world evolved and how continents formed, which is what you see in Chrono Trigger's area of the world that holds the continents Guardia, Zenon, Medina, and Chorus. While there is a lengthy theory on the continents being part of a chain of islands, much like Hawaii, it can be safely assumed that the Super Nintendo's limitations were the cause of this seemingly small world. In Chrono Cross, you have to start factoring in alternate timelines into the world history. It starts to get a bit bulky with possibilities and random lore, such as the Dino Age ending where the humans lost against the Reptites and are now Reptites themselves. The Dino Age timeline is pulled into the plot of Chrono Cross, allowing the existence of mechanical dragons that serve to balance nature, as Balthazar is fucking with it too hard. Speaking of Balthazar's fucking the world too hard, we get to the section of the world that Chrono Cross takes place in, which is called El Nido, or The Nest, as it translates to from Spanish. Originally, Balthazar constructed his time fortress, Chronopolis, in the El Nido area, and when the time crash happened, it sent the fortress back in time. Fate, the supercomputer, wanted to create its own paradise, and created most of the land in El Nido. These included Earth Dragon Isle, Guldove, Hermit's Hideaway, Isle of the Damned, the main island that has Fort Dragonia, Arni, and Termina, Marbul, Sky Dragon Island, which is actually Dinopolis ruins, and the Water Dragon Isle. All of the inhabitants were monitored by Fate, but when the mainlanders from Zenon came and established themselves on the islands, it resulted in the creation of Termina, something outside of Fate's control. Apparently, El Nido was entirely Balthazar's master plan to eventually have Surge be born and become the arbiter of the Frozen Flame, and that he would create the Chrono Cross and save Schala. How this man could plan this insanely implausible path to success is beyond me, but don't worry, I'll be ranting about that later in the open discussion section at the end. For now, let's move on to the characters connecting the series together. It should come as no surprise that Schala is an influential character over the course of the 3 games. Originally, she was the princess of the Zeal Kingdom, possessing an immense amount of magical potential that was said to surpass even her mother, Queen Zeal. Due to her gift, she was given a pendant to control the Mammon Machine. Eventually, the Queen and the Enlightened One's greed for power and immortality forced Schala to unlock the Mammon Machine's full potential, which caused the Ocean Palace incident, where Lavos was awakened and caused a temporal distortion that sent Janus, aka Magus, to 600 AD, Melchior to 1000 AD, Balthazar to 2300 AD, and Gaspard to the end of time. With Schala and the Queen being the only ones to remain with Lavos, it is unknown what happens at this point, with many speculating that Schala transported her and her mother to safety. When Chrono and crew begin to interfere with the flow of time, the situation changes slightly. Lavos is still awoken, but the gurus are not present at the Mammon Machine's activation. Instead, the Prophet, later to be revealed as Magus, when Lavos confronts them, Chrono faces the beast only to be obliterated by a beam of light. This gave Schala enough time to transport the rest of the crew out. But what about her? This unanswered question was addressed in so many different ways, creating a clearer picture once all of the pieces were put in place. The first attempt at this was Radical Dreamers, where the main character Kid is revealed to be Schala in the end. It was said Schala, wrought with guilt for destroying her kingdom of Zeal, was unaged, transported through time, and had her memories erased by the frozen flame. Upon finding the flame at the tail end of the game, the frozen flame reacts to Kid's voice when she initially finds the frozen flame and, when she shatters the Chrono Trigger, allows her memories to return to her and realize who she really is. However, seeing as Radical Dreamers was labeled as an alternate dimension, would that remain the same in the Chrono Trigger world? This is where Chrono Cross, along with a segue from the PlayStation 1 port and the DS remake of Trigger, begins to take a look into what happened to Schala. I'll start chronologically according to the game releases. So in Chrono Trigger for PlayStation 1, added a few new hints, with the major one being the small baby that Lucca finds with a pendant identical to Shala's around her neck. Fast forward to the DS remake, where we are treated with a bonus final boss, the Dream Devourer, a being that could feed off thoughts, memories, and dreams across time. Atop the beast's back is Schala sealed in a red light. Despite the efforts of Chrono and crew and a Magus from an unknown timeline, they are unable to free her from the creature. Chrono Cross reveals that Schala fell into a dimension pocket that brought her to the darkness beyond time and the ruined Mammon Machine. It was there that a defeated Lavos absorbed her. With that last bit of her mind intact, Schala sent a clone of herself to 1004 AD, where Lucca found her with the pendant. From there, the child was named Kid and took on a life of her own. After the death of her sister Lucca, Kid is recruited by Balthazar to time travel and prevent Surge from dying. The task is complete, and the 2 dimensions are formed, one where Surge is dead and the other where he is alive. The shadow of Schala would linger around Kid throughout the game, what with Balthazar's underlying goal being to save Schala from the Time Devourer by splitting the dimension in order to obtain the mysterious 7th elemental, the Chrono Cross, that has the power to free her. Not only that, specific dialogue in the game reminds Kid of her ties to Schala, such as when speaking to the Frozen Flame, where she replies, "An ancient magical kingdom that you destroyed 10,000 years ago? What are you talking about? Stop it, I don't know nothing. I'm Kid. I'm myself and nobody else." In the end, when the dimensions merge back together, it is not officially known what happens to Schala and Kid. Some say they merge into one person, with evidence in her journal entry being signed as Schala, Kid, Zeal. The less sturdy evidence of the merge comes from the last lines of dialogue during the good ending that seems to switch between Schala speaking and Kid's accent, but appears to be said by one person. But again, they could just be taking turns saying things. Others believe there are 2 separate people, as Schala would be unable to erase an entirely new being from existence and fuse with them, especially after the nightmarish situation she had just been in. Ideas suggest that Schala continues onward to locate her brother Janus, while Kid stays in El Nido, possibly meeting Surge again, possibly not. The absence of Janus and Magus from the game, while it was a developer decision, would make more sense for the story if Schala is set on finding him afterwards, which would also explain the modern scenery in the ending credits that depicts Schala searching for someone. The wedding photo in the ending, obviously of Kid and Surge, with proof from some concept drawings, would be in Shala's possession for any number of valid reasons. She may have attended the wedding, she kept in contact with them since they saved her life, or it could be seen as a keepsake. There are many items as to what exactly happened in the end. Director Masato Kato wanted to leave the ending open-ended in order for the player to think beyond the game, stating that, In each independent parallel world, there would be respective developing stories. If we did it that way, people at home could use the experience of Surge in the game's world to think about the reality of their own world. Maybe somewhere in our world there's a kid, and surely someday we will find and meet. For a long time I've wanted realizations developed from games and not just stop with the game. And now I feel I've done it right. There's a message that comes after the ending movie, and I hope that all players will understand these words that have come from my heart. That's what I'd love to happen. Magus is a mysterious character throughout the 3 games in the series. While yes, it isn't Magus in Chrono Cross, there are some possible theories and connections that bring about his identity as the mysterious magician Guile, but we'll get into that in a bit. In Chrono Trigger, Magus was originally known as Janus. He was the younger brother of Schala and originally from the Kingdom of Zeal in 1200 BC, also known as the Dark Ages in the Super Nintendo version or Antiquity in the DS remake. When the Mammon Machine was activated in the Ocean Palace for the first time, Janus saw Lavos. From there, he and the Gurus were absorbed into the gates and transported across time, with Janus ending up in the Middle Ages. From there, the green mystic named Ozzy groomed Janus to become the leader of the mystics when the boy defended himself with magic against wild monsters, something humans shouldn't be able to wield. He eventually assumed the name Magus in relation to his strong magical power. During the epilogue of Chrono Trigger, Magus vows to look for Schala, as her fate remains unknown. From this simple gesture, the character of Magus is hinted at the form of Guile, or Magil in the fan translation, in Radical Dreamers. The evidence of Magus and Guile being the same person comes down to an offhand conversation and his appearance, I guess? During the game Radical Dreamers, there is a conversation where Guile mentions that he knew the owner of the Masamune, stating that he was not his friend but also not an enemy, referencing the relationship he had with Frog, aka Glenn. Fans of Trigger would know the connection in a heartbeat and put 2 and 2 together. As for his appearance, Guile is a mysterious and apparently handsome man. We'll just have to believe them on this one. He is depicted with long blue hair, he can float, and that's really all we can pull from that aspect. His character seems to be adept at shadow magic, fading in and out of the shadows, and using magic to escape from the depths of the Viper Manor. While Radical Dreamers put some emphasis on the Magus-Guile connection, it was unfortunately lost when Chrono Cross was in development. The character of Guile was set to appear in Cross, but was later reincarnated into the character Guile, losing his complex story plot as it would be too difficult to fit into the already brimming story that Chrono Cross held. The hints of Magus' character, however, still remained intact. In the Japanese version of Cross, Guile's name is Alf, perhaps after Alphador, Janus' pet cat he had in Zeal. His design is somewhat reminiscent of Guile's, and Guile's assigned elemental type is black. There is also a rumor that places Guile as a simple Easter egg, designating the events of Radical Dreamers having taken place in an alternate dimension. Director Masato Kato notes that Guile was indeed meant to be Magus, saying that the true identity of Guile was supposed to be Magus after the events in Trigger. However, as the game's development progressed and we decided to use a huge number of playable characters, we decided not to make him be Magus. In a way, as I really would like to have seen the valiant figure of Magus come to life again. Despite the initial disconnection between Magus being Guile, the DS remake of Chrono Trigger could shed some hope into Guile being Magus after all, and not just as a character the development team failed to integrate. After defeating the optional boss Dream Devourer, Magus has time to speak with Schala. It is here that Schala says that the strength he possesses cannot free her, that no power can. Magus asks himself why he exists if he cannot save her, and that if this is truly the way things were to be, that he would rather abandon all that was and fade away. Magus then ends up waking up in a forest, not knowing who he is, but that he was searching for something. Guile's profile in Cross mentions him coming to El Nido in search of mystery and curiosity. Perhaps it's Magus' innate desire to seek out his sister that fuels his journey for the unknown? Who knows?
Lucca. Childhood friend trope if ever there was one. She's brainy, she's cool, trustworthy, but then a hot princess swoops in and steals Chrono away from her. Though her friendship with Chrono does seem quite platonic, Marle must have had some impact on the dynamic the two of them had. Anyways, not only does she serve as a main character in Chrono Trigger, Lucca is worth looking at more in depth as she plays a fairly instrumental role in Chrono Cross's plot, despite never really showing up. Aside from in ghost form, her role is pretty straightforward in Chrono Trigger. With her father Taban, she creates a matter transporter that, as we all know, goes haywire when Marle steps into it with her pendant. Lucca also crafts the gate key to allow our heroes to travel through the time portals. And when Robo isn't around, she fiddles with computers and is usually successful in cracking them open. As the brains of the gang, she also keeps everyone in check, as well as finding logical ways to tackle problems. But that's not to say that she is devoid of emotion. Lucca gets some nice moments with Robo, and even uses a special gate to go back and prevent her mother's accident. Now, when we get into her post-trigger life, we learn that Lucca continues her time experiments, theorizing that with a time egg and black holes, time travel could be achieved. The ghost blobs of Chronopolis explain her theory that by rotating a single point of supergravity, space-time continua can be drawn in. This making it possible to transform that singular point which pulls everything else into a ring formation, or a gate. Her work contributed to the research being done at Chronopolis. Now, whether that is a good thing or not is debatable, given how terribly things went with the time crash. So, Dr. Lucca Ashtier remained busy in her research, but what else? Well, how about her big connection to Kid? In post-trigger, as part of the final cutscene of the PlayStation version of the game, Lucca finds baby Kid in a forest wearing Scala's pendant. After this, Lucca opens her home up as an orphanage and raises Kid, and presumably some other children who we never get to know. We also know that Lynx and Harl kidnap, or at the very least try to coerce Lucca into doing their bidding, the pair torching the orphanage in the attempt to snag Lucca. Their goal was likely to get her to disable the Prometheus circuit so Lynx could get the frozen flame. It is widely believed online that Lucca is killed by Lynx. As much of a dark turn as that is, in the late game, we visit Lucia in the basement of Viper Manor, and she's been holding on to a letter from Lucca all this time. It is addressed to Kid. She starts with an eye roll of a comment about hoping Kid is raising a happy family, before getting to something a little more interesting. She expresses some doubt if what she and the Chrono Gang did was the right thing, wondering what happened to the time that was supposed to exist before they changed the course of history. She worried about revenge, and possibly being killed by someone from the future. Towards the end of her letter is a crucial link to Schala, with Lucca saying that Kid reminds her of someone she remembers from a long, long time ago. Lucca also makes the assumption that Janus may have found Kid and is watching over her. That's interesting. Anyways, this letter gives us the most humanizing look at Lucca. In Trigger, she's pretty much focused on the mission, stop Lavos. But here, we get to see her kind, caring nature on display. It's a bit schmaltzy, but it is a nice bit of character work.
One of the most prominent non-playable characters between Chrono Trigger and Chrono Cross is Balthazar, the Guru of Reason. Funnily enough, when he introduces himself in Cross, he refers to himself as the Guru of Time, despite that name belonging to Gaspar. In Chrono Trigger, Balthazar originates from Antiquity, aka 1200 BC, aka the Dark Ages. He serves as one of the gurus who serve Queen Guile as her trusted advisors. When the initial summoning of Lavos fails, it sends the gurus and Janus to different time periods. Balthazar ends up in 2300 AD, the time after Lavos has destroyed the world. There he researches Lavos and manages to build a time machine that he calls the Wings of Time. He plays a significant role in aiding Chrono and crew, allowing them to return to Antiquity to interfere with Queen Guile's mad plans, and gives them instructions on how to revive Chrono when he is destroyed by Lavos. Moving on to Chrono Cross, it's safe to say that Balthazar is the one responsible for Chrono Cross's plot, basically. In 2400 AD, Balthazar, desperate to save Schala from the Time Devourer, created Chronopolis and used the frozen flame as its energy source. He set up numerous plans to enact his grand scheme, with the main focus to create the Chrono Cross that would eventually free Schala. He orchestrates everything. The Neo Epoch, the creation and population of El Nido, Project Kid, everything to make the conditions perfect for his plan. You do see his character in Chrono Cross having used the Neo Epoch to direct Surge and fix Project Kid that was a bit messed up due to the time crash that his Chronopolis caused. On to our next character, Robo, who has an unfortunate fate in Chrono Cross. Our beloved robot from 2300 AD in Chrono Trigger is made into the Prometheus circuit, a device that would block anyone from accessing the frozen flame, and becoming its arbiter and effectively sealing fate away by locking it out from controlling its power. This circuit was designed by both Balthazar and Lucca to help Project Kid succeed. They wanted Surge to make contact with the frozen flame and eventually be saved by Kid to cause a dimensional split. Our poor Robo is eventually eliminated by Fate once it becomes aware of Robo's purpose to rebel against Fate. Although once the two dimensions are united at the end of the game, it's safe to assume that there was never any need to create Project Kid and Robo would be spared. Onto our last character. While not a major player in the development of Chrono Cross's plot, the character of Riddell has an interesting shift from Radical Dreamers to Cross. Many players are familiar with her look from Cross, the purple-haired, snake-like girl who has amazing magic power. Now, if I showed you this picture, would you think it was the same character? Probably not, but it's true. Riddell's design changed so drastically that I had a hard time thinking that the lean-esque looking character was her.
Ah, the Masamune, the legendary sword with a lot of backstory. Crafted from Dreamstone by Melchior in the Age of Antiquity, the Masamune got its start as the ruby knife, made for the purpose of destroying the Mammon Machine. It also carried inside it two spirits, those of Masa and Mune, with Masa saying that they are the embodiment of Melchior's hope. So yeah, magic knife with spirits inside, made of legendary material. It's pretty important. Now, Dreamstone was a mineral native to the planet, found in abundance in prehistoric times, but reacted strongly to Lavos' energy, and as such was used extensively in Zeal to power key items and harness Lavos' power. The Mammon Machine was made from Dreamstone, as was Scala's Pendant. When our heroes enter the Ocean Palace to stop Queen Zeal from activating the Mammon Machine, Chrono plunges the ruby knife into the Mammon Machine, and the resulting surge of energy causes the knife to react, change form, and become the Masamune. I find the name change a little odd, but I would imagine that after reacting to the Mammon Machine, the sword was probably nameless as it lost its red color, and as such, ruby knife wouldn't make any sense anymore. But with Masa and Mune trapped in the sword, if anyone were to come across it, the two spirits would likely tell the adventurer their names, and from there the sword would probably be rebranded as the Masamune slowly over time. The sword rests in a cave in the Denadoro Mountains until approximately 590 AD, when Cyrus and Glenn find it, but before they can do anything with it, Magus appears, striking down Cyrus, turning Glenn into a frog, and splitting the sword in two. When Chrono and gang head up the mountain in 600 AD, they find the spirits of Masa and Mune, as well as a piece of the sword. The broken blade of the sword is taken to Melchior, where he confirms that yes, it is the legendary Masamune. But our heroes need to find Dreamstone and the hilt to fix it. Luckily, with access to the prehistoric era, our heroes can have a quick chat with Ayla and earn some fancy red rock to make the impossible happen. The sword remains relevant throughout the game and gets powered up during Frog's endgame side quest at the hero's grave, aka the Northern Ruins of Chorus, where the ghost of his old friend Cyrus finally helps Frog process the guilt of being too weak to help his friend. The sword also makes an appearance in Chrono Cross, though here it is a sword of pure evil. Why? Well, almost immediately following the events of Chrono Trigger, the Kingdom of Guardia falls, a topic we will touch on in a little bit. During that event, the Masamune is corrupted and vanishes. It reappears in El Nido, and is found first in Divine Dragon Falls by Radius. The evil energy of the blade causes the user to go mad, and Radius, under this influence, kills his good friend Garai. The sword then appears at the Isle of the Damned. In another world, the knight Dario grabs hold of the sword and attempts to strike down Karsh. Karsh defends himself, killing Dario in the process. Now, Dario is alive in Homeworld, but is in a coma-like state on Forbidden Island. With Riddell in the party, and with the memento pendant in hand, Dario is stirred from his slumber, and the Masamune finds its way to him. Taking down Dario in arguably the toughest fight in the game, Surge is rewarded with the Mastermune. Now, this is the only place where the translated name of the sword loses some of its oomph. The Japanese Masamune was known as Granryon, and here the Mastermune takes on the name Grand Dream. Not a sexy sword name, but incorporates Melchior's original vision better. A sword imbued with his hope is now a grand dream. I think that seems more fitting than Mastermune, but it's a minor issue really.
The Chrono Trigger, which also takes the form of the Time Egg in Chrono Cross, is an egg-shaped item that is a metaphor for various possibilities. As Gaspar, the Guru of Time, says, the Chrono Trigger represents pure potential. By unleashing a specific course of events, it can have a powerful effect on time. It is assumed that Gaspar created the Chrono Trigger back when he was still living in Zeal. In Chrono Trigger, the item serves as a key to bringing back Chrono from the dead by rewriting history. This is done by invoking a self-contained gate inside the Chrono Trigger, using a clone and replacing the real Chrono moments before his death, allowing the party to witness his passing and keeping their determination to bring Chrono back intact. The use of the Chrono Trigger comes at the end of Radical Dreamers, where Lynx tricks the party to enter the deepest parts of the Viper Manor in order to take the Chrono Trigger from Kid. We find out that Lucca was the one that gave it to Kid, and upon breaking the item to foil Lynx's plan to harness immeasurable power, it opens up an alternate dimension where Kid discovers that she is a clone of Schala. Chrono Cross takes an interesting twist and has Lynx and Fate call Surge the new Chrono Trigger. On Opasa Beach, the ghost child of Lucca says this: the Time Egg, the ancient sage Gaspar once called it the Chrono Trigger, you know. Each of us allows our feelings to be a trigger. Letting them loose changes our world, time, and history. This means that anyone that forces its emotions onto history and can invoke great change can be called a Chrono Trigger. The game also introduces players to the Time Egg, which serves as a key to accessing the darkness at the end of time from Opasa Beach, where the party fight the Time Devourer, the true final boss of the game. At some point in an RPG, you're bound to need an item with some kind of legendary properties that you must find in an obscure place or cobble together through a variety of smaller fetch quests. Chrono Cross has its share of these items, but none more important than the item which bears the same name as the title of the game, the Chrono Cross. Surprisingly, there isn't a great deal of lore behind this item in particular, which, when bestowed upon the party, practically explodes out of the text box with all caps. But this legendary item holds the fabled seventh element, and is the key to saving Schala from her cruel fate. The Chrono Cross is made from two Dragon Tear fragments, the Tear of Hate and the Tear of Love. So what's the Dragon Tear? The Dragon Tear was made by the Dragonians, the descendants of the Reptites, in antiquity, likely in the period after the war between Chronopolis and Dinopolis. The Dragon Tear has the ability to allow two people to exchange bodies. Why? Who knows? Maybe at one point body swapping seemed something the Dragonians might need to do in the future. When a body swap is performed, the tear shatters, as we see early on when Lynx and Surge first swap, and we receive a shard of the Dragon Tear, the Tear of Hate. When the dimensions split into Homeworld and Another World, a Dragon Tear could be found in each dimension. So in order to return Surge to his original body, we have to use the Dragon Tear in Homeworld to do so. That tear shatters and gives us the Tear of Love. So these two mystical, very powerful items from across dimensions are brought together and melded into one even more powerful item, the Chrono Cross, at the Divine Dragon Falls in Another World, because it doesn't exist in Homeworld. It's interesting that the Tear and the Cross are items that come from the Dragonian, or more natural side of this interdimensional conflict. I would say, to really hammer home the point that the technological determinism of the humans and Chronopolis is not the way to live. So the Chrono Cross, at first, doesn't even seem that important. It's a key item, but also an element that you can equip. Except it does nothing. But as our heroes make their way to the top of Terror Tower in the end game, and stop to chat with Balthazar, we learn that the Chrono Cross has the power to cross space and time and unify people's thoughts and feelings, and has the power to transfer memories. And by using it after the 6 elements are used in a particular order, creates a healing harmony to combine the sounds of the world into one melody. Oh, so pretty important. Fun fact, the correct order of the 6 elements can be heard in the room outside Balthazar's in Terror Tower, playing the exact tune you need to replicate in order to activate the legendary item. Anyways, the Chrono Cross element can only be used for this purpose in the final battle against the Time Devourer. Using the 6 elements and then triggering the Chrono Cross frees Schala from the Time Devourer, and delivers the good ending of the game. While the Frozen Flame is an influential object of desire in both Radical Dreamers and Chrono Cross, it was never introduced in Chrono Trigger, even though its origin takes place during the first game. The Frozen Flame is a piece of Lavos that splintered off when it descended onto the Earth. The shard was sentient and able to uplift early humans and sow the seeds that would eventually allow them to harness the power of magic. This is proven by the fact that pre-Lavos influenced Isla is unable to harness the power of magic, having never been exposed to the Frozen Flame. It is said that the Kingdom of Zeal discovered the artifact many years later, using it as a possible power source for the kingdom. Upon Zeal's destruction, it was forever lost to time and fell into the realm of legends of myth, with many saying it could grant wishes and impart immortality. The Frozen Flame was eventually located in 2300 AD by Balthazar, who then utilized its potential energy to power Chronopolis. After the time crash, its legend spread to the inhabitants of El Nido. It wasn't until 1006 AD, when Surge was badly wounded, that a magnetic storm, apparently caused by Schala, materialized and blew his father Wazuki, Miguel, and Surge into the Sea of Eden, where Surge was made the arbiter of the Frozen Flame, having come into contact with the Prometheus circuit to be healed. The string of events that followed this sudden shift paints the picture of Chrono Cross's plot, with Surge, Fate, and the Dragon God fighting over control of the Frozen Flame. In the end, it is lost, and no one has since been able to locate it. In Radical Dreamers, the Frozen Flame looks like a scarlet crystal, and is the key item that the 3 thieves are itching to steal. What the group doesn't know is that Lynx has orchestrated the entire plot, drawing Kid to Viper Manor after murdering Lucca in order to steal the Chrono Trigger/Time Egg off of her, and use it in conjunction with the Frozen Flame. With their combined power, he would be able to bend space-time, allowing him to reshape history at will. While the Frozen Flame itself isn't really evil, it's more those using the flame that could be considered evil, according to their actions. The line Stina says that the evil flame that sought to engulf the world was passed down from the legends on the Dragonian side. When the Frozen Flame was used under Fate's control, it was able to seal their dragon god away. It was dubbed an evil item in the Dragonian legends, yet it was often just a misused power source.
Like the Masamune and the Mammon Machine, which we'll get to next, Marle's mysterious pendant in Chrono Trigger is made of the legendary material Dreamstone. Crafted in the time of the Kingdom of Zeal by Melchior, it was passed down through the ages and wound up in Marle's possession, a royal heirloom bestowed on the Princess of Guardia. The pendant is the catalyst for the entire plot of Chrono Trigger. When Marle steps onto the telepod, the pendant reacts, opening the first gate and starting our adventure. What exactly triggered this is hard to say. Did Lucca, in developing the telepod, unknowingly tap into Lavos' energy, and the pendant reacted to that energy when the telepod booted up? That would make some sense, given that when we visit the Kingdom of Zeal and learn that the pendant is in fact Scala's, we take the pendant to the Mammon Machine to be charged up. Seeing as the Mammon Machine is a conduit of Lavos' energy, maybe Lucca's telepod worked in a similar fashion. The pendant, once charged, opens doors and chests locked by Zeal's magic, which we find scattered across the timeline. One such door is the one in
Keeper's Dome
in 2300 AD, where Balthazar toiled away on his time experiments and constructed the epoch. So, the pendant is a key item, not only in the sense of typical game progression, but connects the worlds of Zeal and the destroyed future. That someone who either was Schala or had similar powers to her would one day find Balthazar and use his creation, Epoch, to stop Lavos and save the world from destruction. It deepens the connections between the characters and really pumps up Balthazar's profile as a huge player behind the scenes in this world. In Chrono Cross, the pendant is in Kid's possession, which is a bit confusing at first. Schala gave her daughter clone Kid the pendant as she sent her to 1004 AD to live with Lucca. This would seem to be a bit of a paradox, as this would mean that Schala did not warp out of the Ocean Palace when it was destroyed and was sent immediately to the darkness beyond time with pendant in hand, thus making it impossible for Marle to inherit the pendant in 1000 AD Guardia. Now, some have tried to reason this away, but really, I think in this case, the answer is to not think about it too much. It's fine. Schala cloned the pendant with zeal magic, just as plausible as anything else out there. So yeah, the pendant is much more symbolic in Cross, and is not that relevant to the plot. Nevertheless, it remains an important item in the series. And now we come to the final creation from the Zeal era, the Mammon Machine, a machine destined to be the crown jewel of the kingdom. Having already been gifted the ability to use magic, the Enlightened Ones who inhabited Zeal desired more power, and Melchior and the Gurus began construction on the Mammon Machine, a device that would tap directly into Lavos' energy, granting the Enlightened Ones an endless source of power and possible immortality. The machine made use of Dreamstone to help with the extraction process. It was built in Zeal Palace, but was moved down to the Ocean Palace to be as close to Lavos as possible. Queen Zeal thinking that more energy could be extracted the closer the machine was to Lavos. However, this move would have grave consequences, as when the machine was powered up by Scala's pendant, Lavos was awakened, causing the Ocean Palace incident. Despite efforts by Chrono to stop the Mammon Machine, it was to no avail as Lavos struck down the floating kingdom. The massive amount of energy released caused a large abnormal gate to form, hurling people across time. The Gurus ended up in 1000 AD, 2300 AD, and at the end of time, and Janus was sent to 600 AD. After the incident, the Mammon Machine would rise with the Ocean Palace as part of the Black Omen. One thing worth noting about the Mammon Machine is its name. Mammon comes from the Aramaic word mammon, which referred to wealth or riches. It makes appearances in the Bible with the same meaning, as well as in Hebrew. It began to be used as a pejorative and took on the connotation of greed, excess, and materialism. A fitting name for a machine that was created to siphon power and satiate the greed of a kingdom. Although it is odd that the Japanese name makes no mention of mammon or some kind of equivalent reference to money or greed. It is simply called Majinki, or the Demon Vessel. The change to Mammon by the English localization team is a great choice, and is the kind of creative choice you might not see as often these days, where literal accuracy is the preferred way to translate most projects.